Hi, I'm Wendy and welcome into my studio and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm really glad you're here and checking out acrylic painting. Maybe this is your first time here, maybe you've painted with me before. Either way, make sure to hit subscribe, leave a comment that just lets me know, hey, the people are interested in what I'm creating, and you can leave a comment and ask me what kind of things you'd like to learn how to paint next, anything about acrylic painting. Today we're going to paint this little raven, which was a request from a comment, so here it is. Hopefully it's something that you think would be fun to paint, and you can customize. You can make the moon bigger, you can make the background different colors, you can do whatever you want to change it up, and I encourage you to do so. But mainly I encourage you to paint along with me. Don't just watch, don't just, oh, maybe I'll try it at some point, save it for later. Just do it. Just get in there and paint, because you're going to feel like you accomplished something, you're going to learn something, and you're just going to feel really good about creating something. And it could be a fun little Halloween decoration or something. Who knows? But let's go ahead and get our paints ready. I'm going to go over supplies in just a second, and let's paint. All right, so today we're only going to use 3 paintbrushes, a 1-inch flat, a 1/2-inch flat, and maybe about a number 4, number 3 round. So make sure you have all those brushes ready. I'm using an 8x10 canvas, and then we're using the primary colors plus black and white using Liquitex BASICS. So that's all I'm ever using in my lessons for the most part. Now make sure you have a cup of water. And I'm actually going to use a jar to make a circle today. So you can use anything you want to do this, or you can even just do it freehand, because I don't really think it has to be a perfect circle if you don't want it to be, but I like it to look nice and crisp. That's just my personal preference. So what I'm going to do first is find where I want my circle to go, which I want it to be centered, going horizontally, but I want it to be closer to the top of the canvas. So I'm only coming down maybe 2 inches from the top. And one way to measure is to just use your brush. If your brush is 1 inch, you can really easily find 2 inches. So somewhere in there, the upper half of the center is what we're going for. And then for this painting, I'm gonna do a light purple to blue background. That's just what I want to do because I think the colors will look pretty. So to make our purple, we're gonna use blue and red. And again, I'm going to start with a light purple. So usually for when I'm mixing purple to make it look a little lighter, I usually use more red and white and just a little bit of blue. So it's if you just made pink and added a tiny bit of blue, that could be an easy way to achieve the color. And you could do a different color background too. Maybe you just want blue or whatever. So definitely feel free to customize. Once you find your spot, you're just going to brush up against the shape object that you have. If you have something, you can also add a little bit of water into your paint if you want it to be a little bit smoother going on. I usually dip my brush in the water just a little bit sometimes to get it to do what I want. And just spiraling out, and then that's it. So now we have a circle. And then I'm going to add maybe a little more white and just begin to brush around the circle. Maybe you have some parts that look a little bit pinkish. And then again, you'd have even less blue. But as I pull out, I want to be able to see some of the blue. And notice I'm really just throwing it in there. Don't worry about it looking perfect. You can just get color in there, and you can always move the color around as you go. So I'm just using white, red, and blue. Grab up more red if you want it to look more pinkish, and grab up more blue where you want it to look more blue. And then if you have about a balanced mix of the two, you're going to get something that looks more purple. So play with that. Now, as I get out to the outer edges, I do want it to look a little darker, which would mean I would just use less white and more of a 50-50 red and blue mix. And that will give you a nice, good dark purple. And I just want it a little bit darker in the corners. So see how the corners are getting a little darker. And then, add white to soften. And then mix a little bit of water, not too much, not too much. Sometimes I do too much water, and then you just have to mix more paint back into it so it doesn't get too watery, because then your paint doesn't stick to the canvas very well. So we don't want that. But notice how I could take, if you are having trouble blending, a little bit of water mixed in your paint will help with that. Not too much, again, just a little bit. So usually I just dip like the corner of the big brush gently and then I mix it into my color. So feel free to experiment. I'm in Southern California, so it's a very hot climate. It's always hot here. Maybe not always, but often. So see how we've got it a little lighter and more purple towards the center, and then it gets a little more blue, bluish purple as you go out, and it gets darker. And then again, that white mixed in is going to be what's making your color look even lighter as you move in towards the center. So I'm just working, around, working those colors in. And just give it a nice push and rub. And then again, dip the brush. You may not need to dip the brush in the water as much as I do if you're not in a hot climate. So you might notice your paint acting a little different than mine. And sometimes I'll have people message me like, I don't know, I can't, the blending, or they'll just have like something different going on. And a lot of times they take it very personal, or they feel like they're not doing it right, or they're making a mistake. But I'm like, it's really not you. Sometimes it's just the paint and the weather, and you don't take it personal. Don't take it as a failure. Make sure you're just accounting for the fact that everybody has a different climate. So don't take it like, oh, it's not, your skill level is bad or something. It's really not probably the case. It's more probably just, you just got to learn how to work with whatever the climate is. And that took me a while to be able to do, to just like adjust whatever I was doing to make sure that it wasn't, that it was accounting for the weather. And then notice I can add maybe a little more red and white, that pink kind of color. And then you can just streak it in a spiral around the shape to create some fun texture. I really like doing that. This is a fun, like, radiating technique. Sometimes I do like a smudging where it's more like a galaxy sky. But when you do a moon or something like that, you could always do this more like radiating, where you just painting in a spiral. That's a really fun look. So you got so many options with painting. I'm going to put a ton more white and get really close to the edge here. I really want there to be like a little bit more of a streak, and I want it to be light, especially in the middle, because that's where we're going to put the bird, and the bird is going to be really dark. So we want the center to look really light. So make sure you're not getting too much of that dark purple in the middle of the canvas, because we don't really want that there. And then as we come down, I'm gonna kind of keep it a little lighter at the bottom in general, because we're gonna have some darker elements coming on the bottom. So you can just stick with that like pinky purple color as you fill down, because we already filled the top kind of. So now I'm gonna start filling the bottom. It's so hot today. So I'm really adding a lot of water into my paint. Remember, don't take it personally. Don't be like, if I'm adding a lot, it doesn't always mean that you need to add a lot. So don't overdo it. If it feels too watery and it's not sticking your canvas and it gets too runny, you might not need that much water. So and again, maybe I want some more like pinkish vibes. And another reminder that you can really do any colors you want here. It's your painting. And maybe it gets a little darker at the bottom. you know, like, but not as extreme as the top. So, you know, maybe I have like a little bit more of that blue, less white mixed towards the bottom, but it's still overall a little darker on the top than it is on the bottom, and definitely lighter through the middle where we have the moon. So those are all happening. And I want you to remember, painting is like, it's like opening a present. You don't really always know exactly how it's going to turn out. That's the fun of it. And then, you know, for another fun effect, we did like more of the pink or like really light color around the moon. You could also do some more of like more of a light blue vibe. So if I have, I'm not cleaning the brush or anything though, so I'm not like going too crazy, but if I just have more of a white and blue mix like that, you can also take that around and see how that looks. Just using the edge of the brush gently following that spiraling out. Looks kind of fun. Now, one thing that's great about painting is if you don't like your any of your little experiments, paint over it. Just add more of that purple color back in and you're good. So don't feel like, I experimented and I didn't like it, but now I have to live with it. No. Sometimes we like punish ourselves in these weird ways, like where we feel like we have to, you know, just stick with it even though we're not really happy with it. It's okay to change your mind, you know, it's okay. Especially in painting. I mean, a lot of times we think like painting is as serious as everything else, but the beauty of painting is that it isn't. So this is where we get to, you know, have less consequences, because really the only consequences the painting, you know, might suffer. That's okay because it's just a painting. Whereas in real life, you know, there are sometimes more serious consequences to like changing your mind and doing things like that. So we can, you know, have to be take a different approach. But notice I can take some of the darker colors and do the same kind of thing that I did with the lighter colors to just add some different movements of color, creating that spiral out, radiating light thing going on with the moon. And just add as much texture as you want with all that. And then while we let the like kind of the big broad area here get mellowed out, we can paint the moon. So I'm going to first just start with the medium square brush and just the pure white to get a base coat. And then this is a great opportunity to kind of clean up the edges of the moon. So mine got a little bit, just a little bit, I don't know what the word is, like not crispy, whatever the opposite of crispy is. And that's just because I put a little bit of water, maybe a little too much water in my paint when I went around, and then it bled under the jar a little bit. And that's okay. I'm not freaking out about that though. I'm just working with it. So notice how, okay. And then you can kind of just work with the dry brush if you want to. So sometimes once I get the base coat of white, I'll just clean my brush off all the way and it's just dry and it maybe has a little bit of white. But then you can take the broader brush stroke here and just rub right along the border of the back, like the color and the moon. And this right here will help if you did get a little bit not so crispy. It'll also help make the moon look a little more glowy, and it will help distract from any, you know, messiness of the line of the crispiness that we're trying to create that circular shape, but we know that there might be little imperfections. So this is the kind of thing that will just make that less noticeable, basically. So you're blurring out the edge of the shape with just the white paint and then a clean brush, just kind of rubbing along that area. And then what we can also do here is give the moon a little bit of like a orange glow, or give it a little bit of color. Now, if you want to keep it more simple, just leave it like that. You do not need to add more color to it if you don't want to. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of maybe some splatter paint just to make it look like maybe there's some stars there, which again is optional. So before I put color on the moon, while I have this brush with white on it, I'm going to get my brush wetter. So I'm getting a bunch of water on my brush, and then I'm going to mix it into a little bit of white. So just a little, you don't need much. You just want to make sure your paint gets a little runny, and then you can come in and like splatter a little bit by just gently pulling the bristles back. And I'm just doing this like towards the top, really. You can put a little bit down towards the bottom, but I'm not putting a ton down there. And then when you're ready, you want to clean and dry the brush, still using the square brush here. And then we can make like let's make like an orange color. So I'm going to take some yellow and red. I want it to be a little more like more red. So I'm making like a good medium orange. You can do any shade of orange you like though. It's totally up to you. And then let's put a little bit, like just sort of go around the moon shape like this. And you can give it some orange vibes. Maybe some parts are a little more yellow, so you can add a little more yellow to the brush. And notice I'm choosing like, okay, on this upper left, I'm going to make it a little more yellow, and the lower right, I might make it a little more orange. So just adjust your ratio of red and yellow to reflect how you want that to show up. And if you get any little smudgies, like I just sort of smudge a little bit, sometimes I'll just wrap my towel around my finger to create a really nice little erasing tool. And when acrylic paint is still wet, it's very easy to wipe up any little smudges. I always like to let people know that that's an option, because sometimes we just get it where we didn't really want to get it, and it's okay, just wipe it. And then once I have that, I can kind of tap it with just the corner, like tap it towards the middle a little bit more here. And that gives it some fun texture. And then you can soften by adding white to the orange and then tapping that in around anywhere you want it to look a little softer. And that could be like a lot of white. That means, you know, you could get really, really light with this color, like almost like a light peach. And just soften or smudge out anything that got a little too bright. Maybe you really want it to be more of like a pastel or subtle kind of color. You can really play around here. Just smudge in. And again, I just added a bunch more white to the brush to soften the color. Leave some of the moon looking kind of white though, because you know, you want to have some texture. Now, another fun way to do moon is to just dip your finger in the white, like choose whatever finger you want, and then just tap a little bit into it. And this will, I feel like your finger creates a good moon crater. That's just my fun little thing I like to do. However much you want to do that. It could be a little, it could be a lot. And then again, maybe you want to you can come in clean and dry your brush and go back into like that darker orange again. So I suggest just play around with your moon until you get to the point where you're not really feeling it anymore. Now, I know that can be kind of abstract, or it's like hard to tell when to stop. That is one of the biggest things about, in my opinion, about making art, that is a skill that you just get better at the more you do it. Like you just start to know a little bit more intuitively, like when enough is enough. Now, at first, we can tend to overdo certain things, you know, like it's just a little harder to tell sometimes, like, should I stop? Should I keep going? I don't know. You know, I don't know. I'm gonna stop. Because I get to the point where I just go, as soon as I'm like no longer having fun doing that technique, where I just, every time I add, it doesn't really feel like it's making it much better, that's usually a good time to stop. And then when I look at it and go, could I live with that? And if the answer is yes, that's a good time to stop too. Now let's also take the smaller round brush that we're working with, and you can use some pure white. And if you want to add some more stars with that, you can go ahead and just gently tap them in wherever you want to see them. So sometimes when you do the splatter paint, it's really a cool effect, but it doesn't always give you exactly where you want it to go. Maybe I want like a bigger one right there, you know, and you want to get like a deliberate thing. So when I do stars, I typically do a little bit of splatter for that spontaneity, and then a little bit of manual for that precision, for like that more deliberate effect. And I think that works out well for me. Now let's go ahead, and we don't want this to be too wet for the next step. So if your paint is still really wet, maybe you can wait a second before you go on, because we're going to put the bird maybe just a little bit over the moon, and we're going to paint them in a branch. So the branch is going to go up, and then the bird's going to be on the branch. Now I'm going to start with do this part first with the medium square brush. Then we're going to move into the smaller brush to get more precision. But I'm going to take the black, and we're going to have the tree coming out of maybe just a little bit off to the left on the bottom. So if you find the middle, and I go just maybe about halfway over to the left, and that's where the tree branch is going to come out of, and then it's going to go up. And like, see how I'm just curving it over, and don't go too high. Like you can go sort of, but don't go too crazy. And then just cut it off over this way, like so. So see how it's kind of coming up, and then it's going to go to the right. So we're going to start with that. And then the bird itself is going to be just in this space. So what I'm going to do is make them kind of big. But they're first going to just start, we're just going to do an oval. So see how I'm just going to make first this oval shape. And you can kind of just watch me make the shape first before you dive into doing it. And then notice how I'm coming like right into the moon shape here. So if you didn't like some of it, I always tell people, don't worry, I'm going to paint over stuff anyways. And then at the top here, you're going to make almost like just a little bit of a more circular type attachment to that. And then the beak is going to just come out to a point on the left. So I'm just going to pull out like that. And with these kinds of birds, they're definitely more, their beak is like a little bit just wider, just a little bit bigger. And I'll add more detail to it with the smaller brush. I'm just getting the broad shape in though first to save myself. And then the back of the bird is going to have some really broad feathers coming out. So see how we can pull some pretty big feathers coming down like this. You can even start to feather out a bit, but it has a nice big tail feather. And then just block it in. So we're going to leave that, and I will, again, I'm going to add more to the shape. And while we wanted to have the base of the tree a little thicker, so see how I can thicken up the base of the tree a bit. And we're going to actually have it come up a little bit around the bird. And I'm going to have another branch that goes this way to add a little more interest over here. So you can do as much as you want with the branches. I'm just adding a base for the branches, and then we can add more smaller branches with the smaller brush coming off. But notice I'm just wiggling the brush, and the brush stroke of the branches is like a thicker to thinner, and usually like a Y-shaped pattern. So notice how I made one big branch that comes into a Y, and then you can make little Ys coming off of the bigger Y. And my square brush is pretty busted up. Like this one is pretty busted. So I'm getting like really thick lines because my brushes need some conditioning. I'll make a video about that too pretty soon. So a lot of times we think brushes are dead, but they're not. We just need to give them a little love. And we just moved. So I'm like, I don't have all that stuff set up right now, but we'll get there. So notice how I've created like the base for everything. And then once you have that, you can come in with a smaller brush. We're still just going to use black, and then you can refine a little bit. So maybe I want the head to be a little more smoothed out. Maybe I want the beak to be a little bigger, a little like thicker, because they really have massive beaks, these birds. So crows and ravens are actually pretty similar. Like, I don't know that much about them, but they do look kind of similar. I think they have a similar vibe. We have a lot of crows around here, more so than ravens. So I'm going to just feather out the edges a little bit. So notice I can go to like under the beak and just gently feather out. Sometimes you need to have your paint just a little bit watered down to get that feathering. Because I have a pretty thick tooth on my canvas. So the tooth is, and I know some people might know this if you've painted with me before, because I talk about it sometimes, the tooth is just the texture on your canvas. So the more texture you have, the thicker the tooth of the canvas. And sometimes it takes a little more work to get your lines into the tooth. So see how I can feather out the back just a little bit? You want to create a little bit of texture going around. And if you feel like you get too much, you can always just thicken the bird out a little bit. So sometimes it's good to start small with the shape of the bird. That way, when you feather, if you get a little carried away, it's okay. You can just make your bird a little bigger as you go, and that's okay. But some birds have like more of a narrow neck. These birds have like a thick neck and a big beak and a little bit of a more like flat head, I guess you could say. All right, I don't want to feather that out too much more because I already feel like it's kind of a lot, and then I can add some more branches coming out with this smaller brush. So this is where I can get a little more wiggly and detailed. Thicker to thinner. So sometimes I'll go in and thicken up some of my branches just so that it looks relatively thicker than my tip. So if my tip got a little thick, sometimes I'll thicken up the branch that came before it to make that other one look thinner relative to my other branch. Hopefully that made sense. That was kind of like, for example, if I made the branch I wanted to look smaller too big, I would make the other branch thicker. So like, for example, if I wanted this branch to look smaller, I would make this branch look thicker. So I could thicken this up even more. And then relative to this big old one, this one will wind up looking smaller, even though it isn't smaller, but it will just relatively look smaller. So sometimes that's a good way to work with your trees if you're struggling with getting your branches thin, or if you get some that look thicker than you wanted, you can always just make other branches look relatively thicker to make the other one look smaller. So many words today coming out of my mouth. I'm just also getting over a cold too, so I'm kind of like nasally. Like these got a little bit too frayed. So again, you can just fill it in a bit. And these are just going to go clear off the canvas over here. I'm going to have it coming around a bit. You know, you get to play. We're making this is kind of like a little bit of a spooky, maybe like fall Halloween flavor to it. But again, you can adjust, choose some different colors. You can add leaves to your trees to make it feel more different season. Totally up to you. So what I love about painting is that you can customize so much. Every little thing. Like you could take this exact same idea as sort of like a blueprint or as like a coloring book and just choose your own elements. Don't worry about making mistakes. We miss out on a lot of cool stuff just because we're afraid of messing it up. And honestly, sometimes you might mess it up. But for the times that you do the thing you thought you couldn't do, it's totally worth it. So I really encourage that, again, especially since it's just a painting. So it's not like the end of the world. This is where we get to do that kind of stuff, like take more risks. And then it becomes very therapeutic in that way for us as humans, I think. So see, I'm just like adding all this kind of fun, like little branch details. And then you can add some more like little twigs coming off with more little branches. And you can really just really relax and zone out and add as many as you want. I'm going to get kind of crazy because I didn't put a lot of stuff in here. And I'm not putting leaves. So sometimes if you don't put leaves, you can really put more of an emphasis on the branches. Maybe I even have some branches just coming out of the bottom of the canvas, you know? Who knows? We can just have these tiny little twigs sticking off this guy. And this is the kind of painting where if you're like, I really need to practice my branches, here we go. This is for you. This is where you can get some practice in. Because the more we do it, the easier it gets and the more you find the way that works for you to do it. So I always talk in especially in my live classes where I can like kind of walk up and see people and see what they're doing. I always invite people to try it a different way, like just to see what naturally comes out of your hand, like, and it might not be the way I do it. And that's okay. I really don't take it personally. A lot of times people, I like ask for permission, like, can I do this? Like as if I'm going to get offended or be like, no, that's the wrong way. Oh, absolutely not. I'm like, yeah, go for it. Like do it. Because it might be what you're going to have more success with just with your own body, with your own physical expression. Everyone's so different. So I just like always tell people, what comes out of you might be just a totally different thing, and that's okay. Our culture is so heavy on comparing that it becomes really, really suffocating, you know, like where we feel like, oh, I can't, this is the way that this one person who's successful did it, then that must be the way that it needs to happen. And then we miss out on so many individual, unique expressions, I think, because we've been taught that there's a wrong and right answer, and that we've just extrapolated that concept into all areas of life, like where, yeah, 2 + 2 is 4. That's math, right? So that's okay. And certain things, yeah, certain things are gonna happen. Like if I mix red and yellow, it's gonna create some kind of form of orange for the most part, depending on the shades you're starting with, but you know what I mean. And I think it's okay to realize that there's not always a right answer, especially in art. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add some highlights to the bird, which is what's going to bring it to life. So I'm going to go ahead and make that purple again. So I'm going to use red and blue, and I'm using a clean, dry brush. And I'm adding white. So it's really similar to the background color we created in the beginning. Something similar to that. And then what you can do, I'm going to take that onto the beak here. And the beak is going to, you want to create kind of like a line that pulls in towards the triangle a bit and then back out. So it's almost like a bent C or an arrow pointing towards the beak. And then I'm going to fill the beak in just a little bit with this color. But I want to leave the edges kind of dark. Don't worry if you get too much. You can always come back in and add more black. So we're starting with doing that. And then we'll take that same color to make a little shape for the eye. Now, you may want to move into like a really much smaller paintbrush than what I've got, but I'm just going with this one. Now I'm going to make a little tiny oval type shape right here. Like that. And then I can pull some little wisps coming around the eye. And then on the neck too. So see how I can pull these little wispy shapes. And then on the neck, maybe you curve it down towards the belly a little bit. So change of direction. If I'm on the right side here, maybe I'll pull more to the right. But if I move to the left, maybe I'll pull a little to the left. Then you can pull down and almost like you're just falling, like pretend like you're brushing the bird. So some of those brush strokes can just follow the shape of the bird. So see how I'm following this, and then maybe I want this one to cut across so you can create some different little shapes for the wings. And then maybe I create more of like a blue, like a light blue. So just use less red and more blue and white. And then that'll change your shade and you can create maybe just a different little section of feathers. So try to change it up a little bit in some spots to get that different look. And again, if you want it to stand out more bright, use more white. So maybe I can get some little brighties right there. Maybe I want a little bit of this blue glow on the top of the head. Or even towards the top of the beak. A little more white to that blue. Make it a little bit of feathering there. You know, you can really play here. So fun. But see how now it looks a lot more alive. I'm going to clean the brush and then maybe I add some like more of a pink color. So you have that red and white. And then I can pull some little brush strokes a little closer around the neck. Maybe I have a few long ones coming here. And then again, maybe I have a little bit of this on the beak too. So we're just playing with a lot of the colors we already put on the bird. Maybe have some littler ones right here. Clean the brush. And then maybe I have some more of like a pure white. So you can just use white. Then I can just cut into there, like right into this big section right here, just to add a little more definition. Maybe I do a little bit like right here. Maybe I add a little bit of more white around the edge, the beak shape that we created. And then you can also do like a little white dot in the eye. So I can pull a little dot right in there. Have a couple of little white feathers coming around the mouth. And then you can also take any of these colors. I'm going to use like the light blue. I'm going to add a little more blue back in. And you can add some highlights to the tree. Now just do it to wherever is the closest to the moon. So for example, on the branches on the right, I would highlight the left side because the moon is to the left. And then on the branches on the left side, I would highlight on the right side of the branch because the moon is to the right of those branches. And they usually would just do the bigger branches, like the thicker ones. If you have really, really thin ones, you can get in there and put a highlight on it. I'm not saying you can't do that, but it might be a little tricky. So you do not have to if that feels a little too tricky. Don't worry about it. Just get the big, thicker ones, especially if you want to make your branches look thinner. Highlighting them is one way to do that. It makes it look thicker or thinner. So if you feel like, oh man, I really got some thick branches, highlight them. And then even more specifically, you could highlight them with the purple color that is in your background. It'll almost act like an eraser. So same thing with the bird. Like, so for example, if I wanted to trim the bird a bit, I could use that background color. So like that light purple that we started with, or something similar. Again, this is a painting, so we're just playing. But I could go around and feather the bird down and trim them down a bit. So see how I can just come in there and like trim on their belly with that purple, and you wouldn't even really know. I'm going to make this bird look a little less chubby. So we're just going to take the belly down just a little bit with the purple. And plus, I just wanted to show you. So see if this feather got a little too sprayed out and I didn't like it. The purple is going to save you on that. Or this tail maybe got a little too thick. Just come in with the purple. Notice how it almost looks like I'm erasing it. Just try to match your background color decently. It doesn't have to be exact, but similar is it's gonna work. It's gonna get your bird shape a little different and it'll be really not noticeable. So, do what you gotta do. I always tell people. And then if you got it too small, you can go back to the black again. So it could be a fun little back and forth. I would only do that when it's dry though. Notice how I didn't do the purple right away. I waited and then the bird was pretty dry when I did that, but I'm going to come back in with just some smaller feathering brush strokes to tie it together. So I'm going to get it just a little bit back in there. And plus, like if you maybe got a little too many highlights, you can darken the bird back up in any spot. Like even with this eye, I'm gonna add like a little black dot to the eye and tone down some of the white and blue to make the eye look a little less large. So that's just what I'm doing. But again, and you can even add like the line of the beak with the black. You can come in, go to the tip of the mouth, and you can just pull the line back. So any of these things that need adjustment are achievable. Maybe I want a little bit of more feathering at the top of the head, like little tiny like feathering. So see how I can get just some little details in there. Birds look fun when they're kind of fluffy, but you don't have to make it. Maybe you feel like that's too fluffy, then that's okay. Do as much fluff as you want. I'm gonna clean up the back of the bird's tail feathers a little bit. Make these look a little bit cleaner and darker. Got a lot of highlights down here that I'm kind of wanting to tone down at the tip of the bird because we do want it to be a little darker over here because this isn't getting as much light. And then you can change anything. So I kind of feel like the bird looks a little angry. My bird looks kind of angry. So I feel like that's part because of the way the eye looks. So you can just paint black over it and then come back in with like the light purple or light blue or even light pink because any of those are good highlight colors to paint on the bird. And then you can just reshape the eye a little bit. My bird still looks angry. I might just have to accept that I always feel like the crows around here, like these types of birds, are kind of irritated. They are at battle with these parakeets or parrots. Maybe they're parakeets. I'm not really sure but they always fighting. They do not like each other. They're like, why? Why do I have to deal with these other little birds, you know? Birds are funny. You could really spend some time watching them. Maybe you could even just dab the brush on some of to create some feathering. I really want you to experiment. I'm gonna kind of come in with like some brighter blue right there. And spread it around a little bit. If you come in with a really bold color like that, don't just leave it in one spot because it can look really awkward. So you kind of gotta sprinkle it around the shape of the bird just a little bit to make sure it doesn't look too weird. And then again, maybe I just do a little bit more black to tone down. Like I don't want so much like on the back right here. I'm going to tone it down on the head a bit. Let's just try to work with this angry eye here. Okay, that looks a little better. And then we'll soften this up a bit. And then again, whenever you do your highlights, you can always reverse do it by adding black to that spot. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I added this highlight, the thing, and it's like totally, I don't like it now. Just paint black over it. So sometimes I gotta go in there and do that. Like even with this blue, I'm gonna just go in and paint a little bit over it because I felt like it was like so thick that it just kind of took over. Then again, you can always come in with the purple. I'm going to do like a little more trimming up on the bird with that background color purple. Just what I want to do. I want you to take some time to play, to pull into the tail feather to create a little bit of a trimmer look down here on the tail. But it's so fun to just play until you feel like, okay, you know, this is good. I got the bird the way I want it to look, and you can like let it go. Maybe you want to add more branches. Maybe you want to add, you know, any little thing that you might want to add. This is the time to do it. So I encourage you to play around until you feel satisfied with what you've created. But again, we're not going for perfection. This is just you're expressing yourself. Maybe you add a few more stars in the sky. Maybe you add more to the moon. A little bit of a black smudge in there. I'm just gonna kind of put that in. Maybe you want to practice your branches more, you know, do what you gotta do. I'm going to call it done because I want to keep it, you know, relatively simple. Again, you can just create the whole shape with black and then brush on some highlights with those background colors. This is really all we did there. And then your moon is nice bright orange color, which really looks nice against the purple. So you have all these different elements playing together. But again, get to the point where you're like, all right, you know, I did it. I learned, and then let it go. And that's what I usually do. I just go, okay, I learned something. Next time I paint this kind of bird, it's probably going to go a little bit differently, but that's part of the experiment. So, you know, play around until you've had, you know, enough and then let it go.